Papa, is it good to be consistent?
Sometimes, Elise. Think about it this way. Do you like it when the Wi-Fi sometimes doesn't work?
No.
Yeah, either do I. We want things that we depend upon to work, and we want them to work when we want them to. We also want the people that we interact with to be consistent in how we interact with them. It'd be hard to get through our day and our life if we couldn't predict how someone would respond to our actions. We form expectations about how things should be, which is both comforting and useful, but I'm droning on because I think you were asking more about if we need to be consistent in the things that we do every day. Is that it?
Yeah, like, why do you want me to make my bed every day?
Well, your mom and me want to have a tidy house, and having your bed made helps keeping the house tidy. And doing it every day helps make sure that it happens. We form habits and routines that help us with these types of things.
But isn't that boring?
Well, yeah, it can be boring sometimes, but boring isn't always bad. But other times it's not good, right? Sometimes we need to change things up and try new things. Otherwise, we can get stuck in a rut in our ways, like this podcast, for instance. It almost always starts out with Tim and me talking, but today we're bringing you in to help with the introduction.
Yeah, it's different for you and me.
Yeah, and it's kind of fun, right?
Meh.
Okay, well, it's fun for me, and it stops this podcast from being complacent and falling into a rut. And that is because we talked to our guest, AJ Jacobs, and he talks about this. So here, listen to what he has to say.
You can make these small experiments on your life, and I think that it has a couple of very important benefits. So they could be just trying a new toothpaste every month or going a new way to work. And the benefits, as I see them, are, one, it keeps life interesting, and two, I've read a lot about how we create ruts in our brain, sort of these neural ruts. I guess the phrase is what fires together, wires together. So the more you do something one way, it's like a ski slope. The harder it is to go another path. So keeping your brain flexible by doing these little experiments, it helps with my creativity, it helps with my happiness level, it helps keep life interesting. So I am a big evangelist for everyone experimenting with their life, even in small ways.
So experimenting's a good thing?
Yeah, it keeps us flexible and creative.
So I hear you saying that it's okay for me to experiment with not making my bed.
Oh, sneaky, Elise. Sneaky. Yeah. Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores human behavior through a behavioral science lens. I'm Kurt.
And I'm Tim. We like to explore why we do what we do with researchers, authors, and practitioners in a conversational setting in order to bring those insights to you.
And in today's episode, along with my daughter, we also talked with author AJ Jacobs on a wide range of topics. AJ Jacobs is an author, journalist, lecturer, and human guinea pig. He has written 4 New York Times bestsellers that combine memoir, science, humor, and a dash of self-help. AJ has said that he sees his life as a series of experiments in which he immerses himself in a project or lifestyle for better or worse, then writes about what he learned.
And it appears that he inspired your daughter to try out some experiments of her own.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see if we get that experiment past her mother. But yes, I think she's already experimenting on the not making the bed because it really doesn't ever happen.
Well, kudos to Elise for trying. In our conversation with AJ, we explored how he immerses himself into his work, how a simple idea of gratitude turned into a journey around the world, and how experimentation can help us cope with life better by keeping our brains flexible.
Our conversation was fun and informative, but I think that above all, it was inspiring. If AJ can do these things on such a grand scale, we ought to be able to experiment with our lives, even if that's just not making your bed in the morning.
Okay, with that, we invite you to sit back, relax, take a slurp of warm experimental brew, and enjoy our conversation with AJ Jacobs. AJ Jacobs, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Kurt. Delighted to be here.
We are so glad to have you. And we're going to get started with the speed round because we know that this is going to be maybe the best part. No, it's not. Of course not. It's not going to be the best part, but we're going to get started with one. So there is a bet on this, by the way, as to how you're going to answer. So just to let you know, big pressure.
Interesting. Okay.
Coffee or tea?
Well, I did write an entire book about coffee, so it would be, I would be quite the hypocrite if I didn't say coffee. But it is coffee.
Yeah,
Good.
there you go. All right. So would you rather have dinner with your favorite actor, sports star, or musician?
Interesting. And by the way, just to go back to coffee for 1 second.
Okay. All right.
I have a section in my book about how the Boston Tea Party was partly because they were rejecting the British and their tea, and that some of them were embracing coffee. So it is a more patriotic drink.
I thought you were going to come back and say that the reason that they threw the tea in is because they were all hyped up on caffeine from coffee. But
That could be. I didn't read that. Okay, so my favorite, I guess I would have to go with actor. I would go with actor, but maybe one of those hyphenates, the actor, director, writer.
Okay.
Anybody
Who
come to mind?
would that be? Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. I did interview George Clooney once for Esquire, and he was very charming as advertised. In fact, he gave me we were just sitting around chatting, and he started walking around, and he got behind me and gave me a little back rub. So that was the highlight of my life. I got a back rub from George Clooney.
I can think of every woman that I know in my life that is going to be envious of hearing that.
Well, that's very nice. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't a sensual back rub. It wasn't.
Okay. All right.
No, but George Clooney just, he evokes that kind of person that you would just I would love to sit down with him and just, he seems like he would be just that charming, gracious, talk about anything kind of guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And he gave me, actually, I don't know, this is not, I'm slowing down the speed round. So please.
Speed round is a euphemism.
Yeah,
it doesn't really always.
All right.
It's not really.
But I do.
Really a speed round.
I remember asking him, I think it was just, what advice would you give people? And he talked about when he played baseball in college. And he said when he would get up to the plate, he wouldn't say to himself, am I going to hit the ball or not? He wouldn't even say, am I going to hit a home run or not? He would say to himself, so which field should I hit my home run to? Left field or right field or center? And it was this sense of almost delusional optimism that he says is very powerful. And I've found it to be, I think it's got its good sides and bad sides. It is good. It is very motivating. I can write a bestseller. I can do, but you don't. It has its downside, and people who think they could be president with absolutely no qualifications, for instance. That's the kind of delusional optimism we do not want. But I do think it's a powerful tool to have in your kit.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to coffee. This is important. So prefer to sip coffee or slurp coffee?
Well, I actually have an entire section on this in my book on coffee, because the true coffee aficionados, the wine ones, the ones who will taste it and say I'm picking up hints of mango and cedar and pineapple, which I do not do. But they say slurp. They say slurp because they apparently there are taste buds all over your mouth, not just on your tongue. There's in your cheeks and in the roof. So if you really want to any food or drink, you should be slurping.
So it doesn't matter, how rudely you are in the restaurant. You should slurp to get
That's
the
right.
full taste.
Forget the etiquette, because you want to aerate. I guess the idea is you want to aerate the liquid so that it's all over your mouth with the air, and you get maximum flavor. So yes, if you don't care about other people and just care about the flavor, go slurp.
Go slurp. Well, and We definitely want to come back to that, because I think that this whole journey of gratitude around your coffee is just a fantastic story and book and everything else. But we do have one more final speed round question that is not really a speed round at all, but it is this. So in your opinion, which is more powerful? Thoughts impacting your behavior, or your behavior impacting your thoughts?
Well, I love that question, because that is a theme that has run through almost all of my books. I don't know. I would say, for me at least, that the exterior has a surprising impact on the interior, that the behavior has such a powerful way to affect your mental state. And there's a quote that I love. I wish I had come up with it myself, but it was the founder of Habitat for Humanity. And he says, it's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than to think your way into a new way of acting. And I just find that so profound and so useful. So I do a lot of acting as if, when I'm afraid, I act as if I'm courageous. If I'm feeling incredibly demotivated, I act as if I am confident and motivated. And after a couple of hours, my mind will catch up with my actions.
Yeah, this is like the classic fake it till you make it kind of concept, right? And you've done this a bunch. You have practice at this. How hard was it for you to get started doing that? Like when you come to this little gem and you're like, oh yeah, I see it. Was it difficult for you to start implementing it?
Well, it is. I mean, it's almost like you have to be an actor in your own life a bit. But once you start to do it and you start to see the payoffs, and I don't remember what the first time I did it was, but, it's certainly, I'll give you an example, I was writing a book on health, and I didn't go to medical school, and I'm not like you guys. I'm not a professional, but I.
Right.
Yeah. No, you have the credentials. I don't. But I. So I would wake up often in this feeling of despair. Like this topic is too big. I don't know what I'm doing. But then I would act as if I were confident, and I would force myself to call the top experts in the field. I remember I forced myself to call my publisher and say, when this book comes out, let's have a big publishing party and serve kale martinis and the healthiest foods and drinks you can think of, and make a big deal. And I wasn't feeling it, but I was saying it. And after a couple of hours of that, it really helped. So maybe that was the first. When I'm not feeling confident, I act as if I'm confident. And as you say, Tim, it's not easy, but it has payoffs. So, forcing yourself to do it, getting over that first little hump, and then riding on the sort of the momentum is so important.
I'm amazed that you thought of kale martinis though as part of for your party. They
are so healthy.
Oh my God, they sound so disgusting.
Yeah, I don't think we ended up serving them. But.
Oh, okay. So now the truth comes out.
All right. And so beyond that, so for the listeners who don't know about you, you have done fascinating work, right? You've written and lived a year biblically. You've written about your year of living biblically, basically following the best you could all the rules in the Bible, trying to be the smartest person in the world by reading the Encyclopedia Britannica from A to Z for a year.
True.
You talked about the health thing that you talked about, right? Being the healthiest person you could be, tracing your family tree, which started to then grow not to just your family, but to pretty much everybody in the world's family, and tracing all that. So you do all of these things, this immersion into this, your work. So you are actually living out these things. So how do you come up with the idea? First off, this is just beyond me. Like, where did coming up, like living a year biblically, come from?
Well, that came from, a lot of the ideas in general, I would say I do come up with a lot of ideas, but 95% of them, maybe 99, are terrible. So that's what I always tell people. It really is a numbers game. Creativity, I do believe, you've just got to churn them out, and some of them are going to work and some of them aren't. And I actually I did it this morning, spend 15 minutes a day just writing down ideas. And I try to have sort of a little mental playground around me. So magazines or books or even objects, and then just try to spin out ideas. And as I say, most of them are terrible.
Give us a for instance. So what's
a terrible one?
Yeah.
Well, it snowed in New York yesterday, so I was just thinking about snow and what can we do with snow. So what about a snowman? What about a snow woman? What about a snow non-binary person? What about, instead of the pipe, how about a jewel? So these are not great ideas. They're not going anywhere, but they're like going to the gym. I feel the mental gym. They are keeping my brain flexible, and eventually one of those ideas is going to be like, why not try living by the Bible as literally as possible? And that is, to answer your question, Kurt, it was, I grew up with no religion at all in a very secular household. I say in the book I'm Jewish, but I'm Jewish in the same way the Olive Garden is Italian. Nothing offense, no offense to the Olive Garden. But I've said, well, one thing, I could study the Bible, but what if I just, as you know, my favorite thing to do is to live these things, experiment on myself, change my behavior and see how it affects me and what's good and what's bad. So it's like, well, what if instead of just reading the Bible, what if I tried to live the Bible? And that was the origin.
Well, you also had to confront some tremendous contradictions in what the rules are, right? And so talk about how you figured out which rules you're going to follow and which rules you're going to kind of put aside and say, okay, that's just not going to work.
Well, my goal was to follow every single rule, because that was the idea, sort of become the ultimate. And there are hundreds of rules, so it's not just the 10 Commandments and love your neighbor, which we're famous for. The Bible says you cannot shave the corners of your beard. I didn't know where the corners were, so I just let the whole thing grow, and it was quite terrifying by the end. I had, a sort of ZZ Top. For those of you who you look like you guys are old enough that you might remember.
ZZ Top.
We'll come back to that definitely. but still, I mean, you didn't use all hundreds of. You narrowed it down to a sort of a subset, didn't you?
I didn't. I tried not to. I mean, there were ones that were very difficult. There were two types of difficult ones to follow. So the first type was those that in modern American society are not very practical, like stoning adulterers, for instance. That was a big one. And I stoned an adulterer using very small stones, like pebbles. So that's the way I checked it off the list. So that was one type of difficulty. And then there were the other types, like where it says no coveting, no lying, no gossiping. And as I wrote in the book, I'm a journalist and I live in New York City. So that's like 80% of my day. So that was an incredibly hard one. And the way I did that, what I called moral makeover, was just what we said before, where I pretended to be a better person. So I had a friend in the hospital. I hate going to visit people in the hospital, but I said, what would a good person do if I were and I acted as if I were a good person, and I would visit people in the hospital, and then it sort of I tricked my mind, and eventually I'm like, you know what? I'm a pretty compassionate person. Here I am visiting all these people in the hospital, and it changed me. So yeah, those were the difficult ones.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating component, and when you think about immersing yourself in that, I think is just interesting. Although the first time I actually heard you was you were with Tim Ferriss, and you guys were both talking about, and I think it's his podcast, and you were both talking about how you basically were at that time both kind of immersing yourselves in these experiments on yourself, as you said, right? So making all of these different things happen. And I find it fascinating when people do that. What did you learn? I mean, if you had to, like, if there was one insight from the Year of Living Biblically, or, trying to read the Encyclopedia Britannica, all of those things, is there a lesson from each of those, or just a takeaway in general that you kind of as a hey, this is, if there's one thing to take away, this would be it?
Well, there were dozens of takeaways, but I'll just give you one from each that really has stuck with me. Okay. And one from reading the encyclopedia. So I read the encyclopedia. It is 44 million words. So it took me like a year and a half, and it was all of history. And one takeaway was, I am so grateful that I live in current times, which may sound counterintuitive because we are going through a very tough time right now, and I don't want to downplay that. But just reading about history and about how life expectancy just 300 or 400 years ago was like 32, about how, a third of women died in childbirth. It's just astounding. I mean, and in fact, whenever I get down on, sort of life, which does happen quite a bit, one of my mantras is surgery without anesthesia. There's 3 words, and I just say to myself, remember, surgery without, because until I guess maybe 150 years ago, that people would have surgery without anesthesia, and the descriptions, the first person descriptions of what it was like, are just so horrifying that they kept me up at night, but they're also very useful. So just remembering that, as tough as times are now, we have, life expectancy has increased, and we have modern medicine. And so, yes, I don't want to downplay all of the incredible challenges we have now, but the good old days were not good. The good old days sucked. They were sexist. They were dangerous. They were smelly. Like, you can't believe, like, the horse manure on the side of New York streets 150 years ago was up to the chest. It is just mind-boggling how horrible the good old days were. So anyway, that's one takeaway.
Okay.
It makes me feel a little better sometimes. For the Bible, and maybe this can segue into another, one of the lessons was that gratitude is a huge theme in the Bible. Say thanks for everything. So I started to do that as literally as possible. So I would press the elevator button and say thanks that the elevator came. I'd get in the elevator. I'd be thankful it didn't plummet to the basement and break my collarbone. And, it was weird. It was a weird way to live, but it was also wonderful because you realize there are hundreds of things that go right every day, and we are very good at focusing on the 3 or 4 that go wrong. So that was sort of the inspiration for a book my most recent book, which was all about gratitude.
Yeah. Well, and tell us a little bit about that book, because the story about how that one started, I heard, like sitting around the dining room table with your kids, right? And doing your gratitude and so tell us about that.
Right. Well, as you say, that started because I was doing this ritual where before dinner, I would say, try to acknowledge some of what went into our meal. So I would say, I'd like to thank the farmer who grew these tomatoes for our spaghetti, and the cashier at the grocery store who sold them to me. And my son, who was, I guess, 11 or 12 at the time, said, that's that's okay. But it's also pretty lame because they're not here. They can't hear you. So if you cared, you would thank those people in person. And I was like, that is an interesting idea. That could be a very interesting project or book. And so I took his advice and I went. I chose coffee, much to his disappointment that the kids wanted, s'mores or candy or chocolate. But I chose coffee, and I spent several months going around the world when we could still travel, thanking as many people in person as I could who played any role whatsoever in my cup of coffee. And I took this wide because it really does. It takes so many people that we take for granted to produce anything. So I thanked the barista, and I went to South America and thanked the farmer. But there was also the logo designer, the truck driver who drove the coffee beans, and the people who loaded the coffee bags onto the ship. There was the truck driver couldn't have done his job without the road. So what about the people who built the road? And it's almost like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. It just got bigger and bigger and bigger until I thanked over 1,000 people.
That is fantastic. And I love that your curiosity went to that extent, right? That it wasn't just, oh yeah, there had to be someone that drove the coffee in the truck. You actually thought about, well, what are they're driving in a truck. Someone made the truck, and the truck is driving on the road. And oh my gosh, someone made the road. You have come to this. You've basically, I think you actually talked about this, that you've created an experimental life. Like your life is largely centered around. Well, I shouldn't say largely. To what degree? Well, I'll ask you, AJ. To what degree do you think your life is centered around experimentation?
A lot. Yeah, I think largely is fair. I mean, I see. And I am a big evangelist for experimenting with your life. And I don't think, I take it to the extreme because that's my job. No one would want to read sort of a mild, like, oh, I decided not to, only to have cashew milk in my coffee instead of regular milk. Like, that's not a book, but that is actually, that's not to be dismissed. I shouldn't be dismissive because that's what I'm saying. You can make these small experiments on your life. And I think that it has a couple of very important benefits. So, they could be just trying a new toothpaste every month or going a new way to work. And the benefits, as I see them, are, one, it keeps life interesting. And two, I'm not a neuroscientist, so you know better than me about this, but I've read a lot about how we create ruts in our brain, sort of these neural ruts. I guess the phrase is what fires together, wires together. So the more you do something one way, it's like a ski slope. The harder it is to go another path. So keeping your brain flexible by doing these little experiments is I think, it helps with my creativity. It helps with my happiness level. It helps keep life interesting. So I am a big evangelist for everyone experimenting with their life, even in small ways.
Yeah. Well, there's the element of a status quo bias, right? We get stuck into the status quo and even just a little push outside of it. Like you said, try a different toothpaste. I mean, what's the cost? The cost of a, couple dollars for the toothpaste. You don't like it, you don't have to. You can try it for a week, and if you don't, go back to your old one. But at least you're experimenting and you're getting yourself out of your comfort zone, which does have those neurological processes that you talked about. That hey, you're reconnecting various different synapses within your brain that now are allowing you to look at something just slightly differently. And even if it's just, and you do enough of that, and then you get a whole different perspective on your world. And it's really interesting. So one of the things, as you were talking about how you come to these ideas and other things, is obviously you're a very curious person, but it's also just kind of going in deep. And I heard Neil Gaiman talk one time. He said, how do you come up, he was asked, how do you come up with your ideas for your books? And he said, you just look at things and things that are really familiar with that you're with, and then you look at them really closely or deeply. And he went into this whole thing about, think about Sleeping Beauty, and this idea that, this woman who is, and he described it much better than I will do, dark black hair, bright ruby red lips, white skin, asleep for a year. And then this Prince Charming coming across and like seeing this dead body, woman and falling in love. And so he goes, so who is Prince? She's obviously a vampire, because if you think about it, he's this narcoleptic, weird guy. And so then you think about that whole story, and then you go, so in that story, the queen who put, Snow White, I guess not Sleeping Beauty, Snow White in that curse was actually the hero of the story. So it changes in the whole perspective. And it sounds, as you just talked about, it's not just the barista, it's not just the coffee roaster, it's the grower, and then all the way down. So it's taking a look at things to that piece. And actually, I watched a TED Talk, your TED Talk, right, on gratitude. And one of the quotes that you said that I just love is smell the roses and the dirt and the fertilizer. And it's about savoring. I took it as savoring the moment. So why don't you explain what you mean by that?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I loved what you just said. There's so much to dig into there. And I do obsess about fairy tales. They are so crazy.
Yeah.
And first of all, like the consent issues, all these princes like kissing. Like, what the hell? This is not. These guys need to get canceled. But then I was. The other thing is what you said about one phrase that I really resonates with me is seeing the world with fresh eyes or beginner eyes or young eyes, because that to me, for instance, even something as simple as when I read, when I'm writing a book and I have to reread it, I try to read it with fresh eyes, meaning like I put myself in the head of someone who knows nothing about it and say, well, would they find this interesting, confusing? Is this? And I just think it's a really important skill. But also for creativity, looking at everything with fresh eyes and saying, why is it this way? Why? Speaking of TED Talks, there was a great one about from a designer. I think he designed the iPod, and I was just listening yesterday, and he talked about how he in 1905, this woman was in a car. I think they had it was some early 1900s, and it was snowing, and the driver had to open the window and reach out and wipe the snow off, and it was really unpleasant for everyone in the car. And she says, well, what if there was a way to get rid of the snow without opening the window? And that's how she came up with the idea for windshield wipers. And it's just seeing that with fresh eye, like, what if? So anyway, that was that. That might have been a little bit of a tangent. I apologize. But
tangents are perfect.
All right. And then the other part was about savoring, which I think is a wonderful and very powerful and important part of our lives that we don't do enough. And I did this in the coffee book because I am, I spent most of my life just slurping the coffee like a drug. I just like fuel. I just wanted the caffeine hit. But these people who are the tasters, the official tasters that I mentioned, the slurpers, they said, no, you've really got to, treat it like with respect. So I was like, all right, I'll try. And I would just, even if it's just 2 or 3 seconds, just leaving it on the tongue and just really focusing on it, almost like mindful. It's almost like tasting meets meditation. So you're really just focusing on the sweetness, the acidity, the texture, and it really does make a difference. And this idea of savoring is a lot about slowing down time, really focusing and having, when you're doing that, it is just such a wonderful experience because like all your other worries melt away and you're able to really focus on this one moment of enjoyment. And I think I often try to see my life as sort of like I'm a curator of these moments. I'm like trying to collect these little moments and remember them, because if not, everything just blurs together and goes by so fast that if you don't consciously make an effort to savor something, and it doesn't have to be food, it could be anything, it could be music, it could be a moment with your kids. But yeah, to me, that is a crucial part of happiness.
It almost sounded like you were going to say mindfulness. It almost.
I throw mindfulness in there. It is like mindfulness and savoring are very close cousins, I think.
Yeah.
What I was earlier praising, like experimenting and changing things. So you do need some of that. But if everything were like that in your life, it would be exhausting. So you need to balance with the habits and routines. And I do feel, like you said, I have some habits that really anchor my life. And I even have found it just in the last year. I made a little checklist. I've become a big fan of the checklist, and even my morning routine, the stuff that I should remember. But it just makes it easier if it's all written down. You know, brush your teeth, put in your contact lenses, do the brainstorming, send a note to my mother of what I'm grateful for, because we like exchange. That's one of our little rituals, and I love that. So balancing, trying to find these novel experiences to keep your life interesting with this routine that will help anchor your life. I mean, that to me is, if you can find that balance, then you're in good shape.
Is part of that these checklists? Do you have a checklist that sort of pushes you into exploring, or pushes you outside of this is the routine, and then at this point in the checklist, you're going to depart from it. You're going to hit the exit ramp, and you're going to have to go off into idea creation?
I love that. And I don't, but now that you bring it up, I'm going to. I think that's a very interesting idea. It's almost paradoxical, like having a checklist of things, that are unexpected. And I guess I have on my checklist that 15 minutes where it's almost unstructured time.
Yeah, but still, it is interesting to think like I'm gonna plan time to be unplannful,
There you go. Yeah. Spontaneity has its time and place.
Yeah. Well,
so AJ, we had talked earlier, and you are doing some your new book that you're working out right now is about puzzles. So can you tell us and our listeners a little bit about what that is about and what you are trying to do?
Yeah, I have been a fan of puzzles all my life. I start the book with an anecdote about how I was actually the answer to a clue in the New York Times crossword puzzle a few years ago. And as a nerd, I thought this was the highlight of my life. And then a friend of mine pointed out that it was actually Saturday's puzzle. So
it wasn't Sunday's puzzle. It was just Saturday.
Saturday. Well, Sundays would have been better, actually. But Saturday is the worst because it's the hardest. They get harder and harder.
Right.
Saturday's harder than Sunday. So the idea is that all the clues are totally obscure. So basically, I'm totally obscure, and until I make an earlier in the week or Sunday puzzle, then I have not made it. So I love that. But I think puzzles, not only do I love them, but I think that they're not a trivial waste of time. They have taught me so much about how to think and how to approach life. And I'll just give you like two quick examples. One is just this idea of of keeping an open mind, a flexible mind, and not falling in love with your hypotheses. So, it happens all the time with crossword puzzles where I remember I had it was a 9-letter word starting with F, and the clue was, this is the result of a bad trip. And I was like, oh yeah, bad LSD trip. It's flashback, and that's got to be it. And I refused to give that up, and it screwed with me and made the puzzle last for like 3 hours when it could have lasted for 20 minutes, because it was faceplant. It was not, that's the result of a bad trip. It was faceplant. It just happened to have the same letters and the same number of letters and an F at the beginning. So that's in general. Don't fall in love with your hypotheses in life. Don't be like, I have to marry this particular person or I won't be happy. No, keep your options open.
Yeah.
And what's another one from Crosswords is, you remember George Clooney and his delusional optimism about hitting home runs. I actually get a little of that from the crossword puzzle, because the Saturday puzzles are just so hard. You stare at them and you stare at them and you have no idea what to do. But you just have to find that one little entry point. There's like, if you can just find one clue that you're like, oh yeah, I think this might be it, then it opens up everything, because there are other clues. So I try to do that with every project. Don't get overwhelmed. Take it step by step. All you need is that one little wedge. And once you get in there, then things can open up and you can actually do it. So don't get discouraged right at the beginning just because it looks impossible.
Well, you had also mentioned, you said, don't get furious, get curious. I thought that was another great concept. Help explain that? Well,
yeah, that is, the book is a lot about my actual experience with puzzles. Like, I went to and participated in the World Jigsaw Puzzle Championship, and it was hilarious. So meeting these wonderful people, but part of it is about these life lessons. And like you said, I love this phrase, don't get furious, get curious, which I originally read in a parenting book. Like, when your toddler throws a tantrum, don't get angry at him or her. Be like, why are they having this tantrum and what can we do? That's a better way to look at it. And I feel that way about a lot of life. So instead of looking at life as a battle to be fought, instead try looking at it as a puzzle to be solved. And it's, I find, much more motivating. Like, if I heard about the Middle East crisis or the Middle East puzzle, I'd be the Middle East crisis makes me want to curl up into a ball. The Middle East puzzle, I'm like, well, maybe there is a solution. Let's dig in and try to find it. So that's sort of the idea of curiosity as one of my favorite emotions.
It seems to come to you pretty naturally, though, doesn't it?
I do. I feel that I was lucky to be born with a good amount of curiosity, but I also think it can be cultivated. I once interviewed Alex Trebek, the late, great Jeopardy host, and he had a quote he told me a quote that I love, which was, he said, "I'm curious about everything, even those things that don't interest me." Which doesn't really make sense in one way, but it also is wonderful. I agree. I am curious. Like, I could spend a day, what's the most stereotypically boring topic, accounting or whatever. I'm sure there's lots of fascinating ideas and surprises in accounting.
Well,
I don't know them.
Yeah. I think some of the best researchers are that same way. I mean, we were lucky enough to talk with George Lowenstein, who's fantastic on behavioral science luminary, and we talked to him about boredom, because he said he hates boredom, and so he got curious. Physically painful to him. So he started to do all this research on boredom because he was curious, like, other people don't seem to be as bad, boredom doesn't impact them as much. I wonder why that's happening. And yet for me, this is really bad. And so it led to this whole line of research on boredom. And then he's done research on, whole sorts of various different things from, sex to, discounting time to money to all sorts of different things. But it's always, as you said, it's like looking at those things and figuring out accounting. Well, there's something curious about accounting. I'm sure I could find something,
That is great. And also, because I've read a little about boredom and some of the benefits of boredom. Did he find any benefits, or he still hates it
well, it very early investigative stages, it means different things to different people. Right. And it affects us differently. And so he's kind of working through that. Well, we're talking about this idea of the book of puzzles. We should just let listeners know when that book will be available.
Not for a long time.
Right.
I am writing. I'm on chapter 6, and but it won't be out until basically a year from now.
Yeah. Okay. So we're talking in February of 2020. This book is going to be available. 2021.
Yeah, Tim, if we were in 2020, we'd be face to face. It would be a whole separate thing. We'd be
dates and times are not
so
my strength.
Ignorant of what is about to come. It would be,
So the book will be available in early 2022.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Just want to get that. AJ, we're also curious about your musical interests and what you're listening to these days. What's on your playlist? What is it that might occupy your mind and your emotions musically these days?
Well, it's weird. I'm a bit of an outlier when it comes to music. It is not a huge part of my life. I love it in the background. Like when I'm watching movies, if you watch a movie like, a thriller without music, it's really weird.
Yeah.
And so I know it's important, but I never just listen to music. And when I'm working, I don't listen to music. I generally don't listen to anything. I sometimes even put on these little headphones, which are not the fancy noise canceling ones, because I lose them and I don't want to spend $300 every couple months. But these are $8 headphones, and
they look like the kind of headgear that the people who work on the tarmacs at the airport are wearing. Just for the sake of listeners can't see them, but they look like big ass honkers that go on your ears to keep all the sound out. Right?
That is the look I'm going for. Exactly. But I will say, I once did an article, I forget which magazine, but there had been some research that people work better with sort of a low level of ambient noise, just like low chatter. You can't understand what people are saying, almost like white noise, but not quite. Mm-hmm. And the clinking. So there was an app, and probably still is, that you could download to have restaurant noise in the back. Or I think you could choose it could be restaurant, it could be train station noise, whatever you wanted. And so I tried that, and I guess it worked. It was okay, but it didn't stick. It's, again, trying things out, I'm all for it. Not all of them stick. That one didn't stick. So I've retreated back to silence.
We're doing Melanie Brooke is doing some research on this, and so we're just gathering some of this information for anecdotal pieces for her. But it's interesting. We half the time people say no music, other half are saying, yeah, give me music. And then there's people who say, well, I can do music if I'm writing or doing this, but if I'm doing other type of work, I can't, and vice versa. And then, is there type of having it in with words or without words? So it'll be interesting.
I've read a lot about people who listen to music before they perform. So like Michael Phelps was talked about how he would just blast, I think it was Lil Wayne, and get him in the mood. So that's another genre of people. Again, I don't do that, but
I wonder. I'm just wondering out loud if at some point maybe there's a day when your curiosity leads you in the from a year of living biblically to a year of learning a new instrument. I wonder.
That is, what? You're right. So I feel that I have under-experimented in the musical genre. and this, you, Tim and Kurt, you are an excellent motivation for me to start, whether it's, taking up the French horn or just listening to. One thing I want to try and experiment is electronic dance music. I listen to it, and I feel like, what my father must have felt when I listened to the Sex Pistols. It's just like, what is this noise? Like, what the hell? So I want to say, like, can I do it? I mean, can I do it? Do I need to, like, be on MDMA to enjoy it? Can I, if I listen to enough, will I understand it and the appeal? So.
The mere exposure effect. You just put yourself out there, you listen to it long enough, and you might actually get to like it. I don't know.
I want to see. Because I've also heard, and I don't know how scientific this is, but someone told me of the concept of taste freeze. Like at a certain age, your tastes freeze. I don't know if that's true, but that's what he was arguing.
Yeah, I don't know of the research on that. I would argue, particularly with your mindset of kind of being curious and experimenting with different things, that it probably doesn't. That you probably have, at least if that is indeed a true thing, you've pushed it off so far into your future that with what you're doing. So there you go.
Thank you. I hope so.
I'm still stuck on getting my head around the idea of maybe MDMA with, all kinds of different musical experiences. Maybe do a microdosing routine on, I don't know. It sounds, that's a great stimulus. Okay, AJ, thank you so much for being our guest on Behavioral Grooves today.
Wow, my pleasure. I had a great time. So thank you, Kurt, and thank you, Tim.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our discussion with AJ, have a free-flowing conversation, and talk about whatever else comes into our flexible, experimental brains.
Oh man, he's so inspiring on so many levels.
It is amazing. I mean, to think that he immerses himself into these projects and has the wherewithal to be able to stick with some of this stuff. And we only just touched the surface in this conversation. I mean, if you know anything about AJ, there's just everything. He outsourced his life in one experiment. Right. He outsourced arguments with his wife. He would have somebody from the Philippines, do that along with scheduling and everything. I mean, It's just amazing the stuff that he does. And then what I find really inspiring part of this, though, is that it's not just for fun. He's doing it to actually learn things about us as humans. It's a behavioral science experiment of one on himself. And, granted, we can't necessarily generalize that out. It's not a good randomized control study, but it does give insight. And as you said, I think it's super inspiring.
So I want to amp that up just a little bit in terms of how he's so inspiring. He's also one of the most humble human beings I've ever met in my life. He is just super ordinary. While we're talking, while we're recording, his son comes in and it's just oh yeah, you need anything, just super easy, laid back. And, oh yeah, well, that's my son. He just needed something out of my office. And there's this relaxed, super chill thing about him that I just find inspiring.
Well, I think that might be from some of the experiments he's realized, that's the better way of living your life. So, all right, Tim, what do you want to groove on?
Well, let's start with immersion and curiosity. Right? Big topics in his life. He's curating his whole life around this idea of diving in deep and being curious.
Yeah. Well, I loved, he said he is a curator of these moments.
Yes.
And again, thinking about that, when you curate the moments of your life, you lead a better life. That's the assumption. And I think there's some value and some truth in that statement. And I just love that idea, this idea of looking and immersing yourself into something. And you don't have to immerse yourself in as like he does, right? But really immersion is just paying attention. It's paying attention to those things in your life, like he did with gratitude. And I think we'll groove more on gratitude later. But this idea of just paying attention to who's serving you coffee. And then, well, if they're serving me coffee, I need that coffee doesn't just come from them. It comes from these others. And so it's taking the time to think about that. It's slowing down and focusing in on the parts of your life that are important. And I think that immersion is something that we all can do.
I want to turn it to an experience in my own life, which was the first date that I had with my wife, Katie. So super vivid in my mind. The experiences are very, very clear from the beginning of the day through our, kiss goodnight. And there's so many little snapshots there, right, that are so fantastic. And part of it is because I was really savoring it. There was a lot of anticipation that went into it. I think about Jonathan Mann with experiences, right? Anticipated experience, the experience itself, and then the remembered self. Man, that was a really, really big deal. And those moments, I was taking in those moments and collecting them in a very intentional way because it was a really big deal.
There's research by Mark Landau at the University of Kansas. He did a study on memory and very different things. And he talks about as we get older, as we age, we group experiences into broad chunks such as work or family or fun outings. And fewer things seem to stand distinct. And and one of the things that they're talking about there is that if you can actually focus and have very specific memories, like you and your wife on that date, right? That lends itself to feeling like time is extended, but also these memories that are going to be much more vivid in our minds, and we're going to remember them because they're not going to get chunked together with, this was just another work day, this was just another family outing. No, this was the family outing that we did this and this and this by just focusing and paying attention on there. And there was a great story, and I can't remember who talked about it, but it was the difference between a grandma taking her grandchild to the beach for the very first time. The grandmother obviously had been to the beach multiple times. This was the first time for the grandchild. What does the grandmother remember? Well, it was a walk on the beach, but it was the first time with my grandchild. That was cool. But the grandchild, it's like waves, it's sand, it's seagulls, it is seashells, it is
the sounds and smells and everything. The
sounds and smells. And so they have, all of these different distinctions because they're new and unique, and they're focusing on them because they're novel. And, if we just paid attention to those types of things, I think we would be much better off. I just think that that's a really interesting thing.
Let me just expand on that with something that you pointed out, actually, Kurt. I want to give you credit for pointing this out, that when we take notice of these moments, right, when we appreciate them, we're going to be closer to being in our groove, if not already in our groove. And this is an important part of really enjoying and having a more satisfying life, that this intentionality and this momentary awareness can actually help us actually live just a better life overall.
Well,
a more enjoyable life, I should say.
Yeah. And I think there's another piece of this, which is if we want to have a creative life, and this goes back to something I heard Neil Gaiman talk about, right? Where he comes up with his ideas and he says, I just look at something really closely. And by examining that, and he went through, and I think I talked about the story of Snow White, where he just really dug into Snow White and then started to be curious. Well, why is Snow White, sleeping for this? What does it mean that her hair is black and her skin is white? What could that possibly mean beyond going past that surface level of examination and being really curious about things and really examining things closely? Common everyday things. And all of a sudden that lends itself into creative approach or thought about how things are doing. And I think that's what AJ's doing. I think that really is this idea. So I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah. Life, live your life as if,
Yeah.
It's kind of the whole thing. And just a quick shout out to Neil Gaiman. If you aren't on Masterclass, get on it and do Neil's Masterclass, because it's amazing.
It is. It's fantastic. So,
okay. What else should we groove on?
Well, Tim, I am so grateful that you asked me that, because I just think that this is a key insight from this, that I am going to take something out of this, is that, gratitude is so important. And just this fact that AJ took it to the extreme, but we don't all have to take it we don't have to travel down to Argentina to thank the growers of the coffee beans and the people who picked it. But we should be paying attention to those things in our lives that we are, just bring pleasure to us, and the people that are doing that, and how can we express that gratitude to them, because that's only going to be beneficial not only to us, but to them as well.
Yeah. In your research on this, I know that you pulled out that the word gratitude comes from the Latin root of gratia, which is fantastic. And I just have to say that I love the fact that gratia refers to grace and graciousness. And so while we have this, there's also, and this is good for us to express it, right? But there's also something that's really good on the other end, because the person who is receiving that grace, that gratitude, that gratefulness, they are benefiting, because human beings need affirmation and recognition from other human beings. So this is like a 100% recyclable, super cool, hyper photo allergenic. I don't know. I mean, this is a really fantastic thing to do, to express gratitude. You not only improve your own life, you help improve the life of someone else.
It is just this reoccurring element that builds upon itself, reoccurring loop. It's fantastic. And there's lots of psychological research that shows that gratitude improves your psychological health by reducing toxic emotions such as envy, resentment, frustration. Robert Edmonds has done a ton of research on this. And I just think it lends itself to a happier life for us. And as you said, for the people who are receiving gratitude. So why don't we do more of it? Why don't we just take that moment to say thank you with real intention, not just that passing thank you, but really heartfelt thank you. Take a few minutes to write a thank you note for somebody. Buy flowers and give them to somebody. Do just little acts of kindness that show that you're grateful for the people and the things in your life that are good.
Yeah, it can be anybody, and it just takes a few words. I mean, during the pandemic, something that I've been acutely aware of are the people on the front lines at the grocery store, because they've been there every day that I've gone to the grocery store. There are people working there. And as risky as that has been, sometimes it's just really nice to engage them and say, hey, I don't know how difficult this is for you, but it's really great for me. So maybe this is like no big deal for you, or maybe it's a really stressful thing for you. I don't know, but I do know that it's a really great thing for me that I get to go grocery shopping and get the groceries that I need because you're here.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can find those people throughout our lives, and we just need to pay attention, going back to that first part of those moments, and curate those moments in our lives, and then thank those people that have helped in curating those moments. So, all right. You want to experiment with something else?
What do we talk about? Experimentation.
Experimentation. I loved, again, what he talked about, the idea, and he gets into some of the science of this, that, hey, experimentation is rewiring our brain. It's creating these new neural pathways, and there is actually some support for that. So there's this idea that the brain has neuroplasticity, its ability to form new connections and pathways and change the circuits and how they're wired, and that is increased or improved when you have novelty and newness, which experimentation brings. So
at the same time, one of the fabulous things that I love about the human condition is that we have this tremendous need for novelty, and we have a tremendous need for stability and status quo. That both of those coexist in the human condition in a really wonderful way. And so we do need to think about things to break up the status quo. I go back to Francesca Gino saying early in the pandemic, Harvard Business School professor. And she said, my husband and I needed to break things up. So for his birthday, I got him dance lessons.
Yeah.
They're doing online dance lessons through the pandemic. He was not excited about it because it did not meet with his status quo, but it actually that novelty kind of breaks things up in a really wonderful way. So we absolutely need that.
Yeah. And I think there is something about this idea of making little experiments in your life on small things that I will go back, that if you pay attention to and you're curious, and then you examine that experiment and say, did this improve my life, or was it just meh, or did it actually decrease my life, my satisfaction with life? And by doing that, those small little experiments, you may not change your life overnight, and you're not going to necessarily have a huge aha moment, but those small incremental changes in your life can, over time, redirect your life's trajectory and the life satisfaction that you have. I always go back to Tony Robbins, who I'm not necessarily a big fan of, but one thing that when I was in my 20s, I listened to his little power tapes, whatever they were. And the one thing that has stuck with me is he said, look, if you change the direction that you're traveling by 1%, and you do that, and you change that 1%, say every week, and you're able to do that, that's a 52-degree change after a year. That's significant.
Yeah.
Even if it's 1% every month, that's a 12%. And over 10 years, that's 120% change. So it's not like taking a 90-degree turn right away, but you can make these small incremental changes. And as AJ was talking about, you can experiment and you can see, is this going to be better? Slurping my coffee, is that better than sipping my coffee? Using a different toothpaste, is that better or not better? Opening the door with my left hand as opposed to my right hand.
Yeah.
All of these things that can just help us really focus and pay attention to some of these things and maybe improve our lives.
So if we're following Tony Robbins' idea of 1 degree every week, then in 36 weeks, or 360 weeks, we don't get back to exactly where we were when we started?
We've come full circle, man.
But
that's
of course,
it,
Of course, you're in a new place, right?
You're in a new place because you've traveled further, but you could stop at any one spot if you like it, right? I guess. I don't know. It's a good thing. Anyway,
okay.
I think it's just one of those really key things, and hopefully people were inspired by this, like we talked about. This inspiration that AJ does, I think, is just fantastic.
So so as you're thinking about, for listeners, if you're thinking about, well, what new thing could I do just this week? There's a whole bunch of new things. One of the things you might do is listen to some new music. You might try out something in our show notes that you haven't listened to before.
Or you could write a review of this podcast.
That would be different.
A 5-star glowing review. You could send out a link to your 100 closest friends saying, you guys have to listen to this episode. That would be new and novel. You could experiment with that.
You could, even more experimental, could be like a 6-paragraph review. Like a really, like an essay.
Paragraph review, not
like
just
essay.
and
not
talk
a 3-sentence
about
review. No,
all of the wonderful pieces. You could maybe go out to the Patreon site and like say, wow, we're going to support these guys
at the $1,000 per month level.
We don't have $1,000 per month level. Yeah. But if you so want to do that, we'd be open to making one just for you. Anyway, we digress, and we're joking, but seriously, try something new this week. Try to do that, and you know what? We'll be back shortly with our bonus track. This is Kurt with our bonus track and groove idea for the week. Our discussion with AJ was inspiring. While he isn't a behavioral scientist, his work looks closely at the human condition, and we think it illuminates a number of key concepts that can be put to use by all of us. The process that AJ uses of immersing himself into a story, whether that be living biblically for a year, or reading the entirety of the Encyclopedia Britannica, or traveling the world to thank everyone who has been involved in allowing him to drink his morning cup of coffee, shows us that by examining life in its fullest can sometimes show us something of our human nature. We can all learn to pay more attention to things, to immerse ourselves in the moment where we can appreciate that moment for what it is, to see the details and see the connections between them, to have some gratitude for the life that we have been given. If we can slow down, savor these moments for what they are, we can create a better life for ourselves and for those around us. The experiments that he does on such a grand scale are beyond most people's ability or desire, but the idea of experimenting with your life is not. He reiterates that you can make small experiments on your life, and we fully agree with that. And that leads us to the groove idea for this week. Find something in your life that you've done the same way for a long time, or something that you tend to just go through the motions when you are doing it. Slow down and think about that activity deeply, and then experiment with it. Try something new, shift something around. I'm going to savor the moment when my entire family gathers around at the dinner table, to look at each person there and to try to appreciate them for who they are. Maybe even express my gratitude to them for something that they did that day. It's one of those moments that I often take for granted, and I really want to focus in on that. So let us know what you come up with and give it a try. And then let us know how that turns out. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, we hope that this week you go out and find your groove.